All right. So, here, let me get back to my thing. Okay. So, for last meeting, I forgot to mention something. And I'll show that here now. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I knew I was forgetting something in last week's. And as soon as the meeting ended, I'm like, oh, it's that. So, one of the big things in the competition last year, like they actually during the competition, the hackers gave us like an announcement thing, um, saying, "Hey guys, watch out for this," and it's the host file. If you guys don't know what that is, it's basically so when you look for a website, right? You usually like Facebook, for example, you'll type facebook.com, right? So the computer doesn't actually know what facebook.com is. So it has to look for the IP address. It's similar to like a phone number in a phone book, right? You know the name, you don't know the phone number, so you look for the phone number. So that's what the host file is. It'll record that stuff. So, for example, let's say Facebook is 192.168.1.1, right? And then Facebook, oops, .com. So every time I type facebook.com into my browser now, it's going to look for this IP address. Um, so let's just do it here. You can see I was practicing earlier to make sure I got it right. So let's ping facebook.com, right? Goes to this IP address. So if you guys haven't figured it out yet, the big flaw here is that we can fake IP addresses with that. So if I was a victim, let's say, right, and I got hacked, they would do something like this, and for their IP address, they'd put the attacker's machine's IP address. And then what the hacker can do is he can make like a fake Facebook page. And basically, anytime you type anything into that Facebook page, it gets stored in the hacker's machine. So that's one big thing that they said in the competition got a lot of us. So we definitely want to watch out for that. Uh, Honestly, I can't really think of anything other than setting it to read only. That's the only thing I can really think of that would actually stop that. So you go to this directory here, C colon Windows System 32 drivers etc, and then right click on it, properties, and then read only, and then apply. So now if I try and edit it, right, just open with Notepad, and then oops, and then I try to save it. It's going to save it as a separate file, right? It won't be the original file. So I think that'll solve that problem. Because I can't really, like I said, I can't really think of anything else to stop that other than, setting it to read only. So um, hopefully that'll help with that. So yeah, that's all I want to show with that. So for this week's meeting, one of the uh, one of the things that we have to focus on is Docker. And here, let me pull it up, the topology. All right. So here's the topology. Now it says 2016 Docker / remote. I have no idea what that means. Like I think they're saying it's just a Linux machine with some Docker containers in it. I don't know, but until we know for sure, which I think Saturday they'll tell us. I'm just gonna assume it's on Linux, because Docker is pretty generic anyway. We can pretty much anything we can do on Linux, we can do on Windows. Um, so yeah, so we're gonna be doing Docker today, and I'm just gonna make a simple container and show you what it does and stuff. Um, so if you guys don't know, Docker is basically it's like a virtual machine, uh, except it's less resource heavy. So with virtual machines, everything is blocked out from the actual host machine. But with Docker containers, it's more quarantined, right? So I don't know how to explain it. So like with virtual machines, there's no way that the virtual machine knows it's a virtual machine, and there's no way it can get outside of its own virtual machine, right? But with Dockers, it can, but it's still its own separate thing, if that makes sense. So mostly what people use it for is if they have like uh, they're trying to run servers with multiple things on them, right? So if you're trying to have a web server, but you also need a SQL server, you want to separate those two, but you also want them to communicate with each other. Um, you wouldn't want to use and allocate a ton of resources for that, if that makes sense. So yeah. So Docker is basically just an easier version of a virtual machine, is the best way I can explain it. Um, so here, let's see. So first thing we obviously want to do when we're using Docker is install it, right? So apt install docker.io. I've already done it. And then we want to do docker network create, and then docker network. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to create a network that all the Docker containers are going to go to. Because I'm assuming for the competition we're going to have multiple containers that need to communicate with each other. So we'll create a network. So after that, we want to create a virtual machine. So we type docker run -t -g -p, and then just to keep things simple, we're just going to do a web server. So we'll only need port 80. And as an example, if you need to open multiple ports, you just do -p again, and then 443, 443, and then -- network equals, and then docker network, right? And then -- name, and then we'll just do web server, and then we'll just do regular Ubuntu. Now, the reason why I had to specify Ubuntu at the end here is because the cool thing with Docker is that people upload virtual machines with specific focuses, right? So what I mean by that is if you want to have an SQL server inside of a Docker container, for example, you can actually download a container that has SQL pre-installed and pre-configured. Um, so it makes things easier. And yeah, and the other thing too, we'll get to that later. So, um, we create the virtual machine, right? Now we need to get into it to run commands and update it, whatever, right? So we type apt. I'm sorry. We type docker exec, and then dash I. Oh my gosh, I can't type. -it for interactive terminal, web server, and then I like to use bash. You can use whatever. Now, I have no idea why, but there's a lot of things you can't do until you update it. Like you can't even type ifconfig. I don't know why, but after you update it, it fixes itself. So do that real quick. Oh, and another thing I forgot to mention, Docker, from what I understand, you can't run. So, for example, if we have Linux on our Docker, which we do, so um, our host machine is Linux, so we can only run Linux machines in our Docker containers. We can't have a host machine as a Linux and then a Windows machine as our Docker container, if that makes sense. Basically, whatever the host machine is whatever is the only thing we can run on our virtual machines. So if we had Mac, for example, and you can actually use Docker in Mac and Apple products, we can only run Apple virtual machines. So yeah, so all right, so we updated. right? So now we got to install Apache because we're doing a web server, right? So apt install Apache 2. And then I also install Nano because for some reason Nano is not installed on Ubuntu. We'll do that. This might take a while. Right, so then obviously we're in America, so we do 2, and then New York, where is New York? Oh, 105, okay. Oh, what? Oh, there we go, 105, there we go, okay. Alright, so now we just run the web server, so service Apache 2 start. You're gonna get this error, it doesn't really matter though. So now we can get out of here. Actually, you know what? No, I'm gonna make a website just to show you guys that it's the actual Docker container. So here, nano var www and then HTML index.html. Oh, you know, I'm gonna delete that actually instead of manually pressing backspace. Right, and then nano. So Docker website, right? Oh, there we go. Okay. So exit. Now, because it's on a Docker container, that doesn't mean we can just forget our firewall. So we need to allow port 80 in the Docker's firewall and our host machine's firewall. And you guys can see here, I already did it in the virtual machine's firewall. So we just need to do it on this machine's firewall too. So UFW allow 80. Oh, we already have it, so we're good. So now, let me just make sure that Apache's not running on the host machine first. Stop. Oh, okay. Oops. Oh, okay. All right, I don't have it installed. All right. So now we should just be able to see it. Let's see here. Yep, there we go. So, yep, that's how you create a Docker container. If we were doing SQL or something like that, it's basically all the same steps, except obviously you change the name, so it wouldn't be a web server, it'd be a SQL server, right? And we would need to change this because it's not technically an Ubuntu operating system. I mean, it is, but it's a different name if that makes sense. So we'll see here. Um, actually, let me do this too. I think SQL the port for it is 3 something. Let me look it up. Here, let's see. Oops. If I can type, there we go. Oh, you know, this is MySQL specifically. 3306 is the port. Yeah, okay. So we'd need to add 3306 in here, right? And then Docker MySQL. Just search something like that. Okay, so it looks like it's just simply called MySQL. So we'll do that. And then we'll type MySQL server, right? So it's downloading it right now. And like I said, for the most part, pretty much everything you can do on these Linux machines with Docker, you can do on any other operating system. It's pretty generic. It's just the only thing is, like I said, the only if you're on a Windows machine, you can only run Windows virtual machines on Docker. You can't because it uses the same kernel, if that makes sense. So yeah. All right. So let's see. Now this is where I kind of like forget everything because with SQL there's a command you can type before you get into it to like set the password and stuff. So I'm not sure if it's gonna do that here. Uh, let's see. Docker. Oops. Oops. Okay. Hmm. So another good thing you can do to see what services are running or what virtual machines are running is Docker and then PS. So that might be good for if the attacker added some Docker containers that we don't want, I guess. Um, it didn't create it. That's weird. Let's see. Uh, hmm. I'm not sure. Let me get back to you on that one. I was having this problem when I was learning about Docker before, and I don't remember what I did to fix it. I know I have it somewhere. Like I wrote it down somewhere. Another command we can use, which I don't think we are going to because you'll see here. Let me show you. Um, yeah, that. If you type that, which I don't think we'll ever be able to remember. So if you want to, I don't know if we're allowed to use notes yet in the competition, but if we are, I would write that down. Whoever's doing Docker. Um, what that does is it shows the IP address for every machine, which is going to be useful because like I said, if we have a web server and then we have a separate Docker container for SQL, um, we might have to write code to map those two together. Like if the web server is taking in data and storing it in the database, but the code is all messed up, we're going to need to know the IP address and write our own code to put it in the database, So um, that's one way to figure out the IP address for each virtual machine. Let's see here. So another way we could also create SQL servers is just with regular plain old Ubuntu. It's a little bit of it's a couple extra steps. So we just type this. Oops, not Docker. Docker. There we go. So Docker run -t-g-p 3306, and then the network name MySQL server, and Ubuntu. Oh, I already have a name. So Docker rm MySQL server. Let's run that again. Docker exec-it MySQL server, and then bash. Okay, so apt update. And I'm not going to go through all this again. It's just an example, but come on. There we go. Okay. So next thing we would type, I'm not going to do it because it's going to take a good like 30 minutes to download all this, but type apt install MySQL server and then PHP MySQL and then PHP. And yeah, then you just kind of go on from there. I don't. I think they're gonna have, if it is an SQL server, they're gonna have that stuff pre-set up, so we won't have to worry about it. But yeah, I think that's it for Docker. Did anybody have any questions or anything? Well, if nobody has any questions, I guess we're good for this week. Next week we are probably going to let's see here. I think I'm gonna try to tackle CentOS or Fedora. Those are in my opinion, are gonna be the hardest ones for us for the competition. Um, because they're so different. I've never really messed with Splunk or CentOS. Um, oh, and by the way, for any of you that weren't in the last year's competition, a lot of these Linux machine are going to be command lined. So um, be prepared for that. Don't go in thinking that it's going to have a desktop environment. If you really want to, I'm sure you're allowed to. It's just you could install one. It's just it's going to take like 45 minutes to install it. So uh, yeah, not here definitely software I want to play. Yeah, no, Docker is a whole. It's a weird thing. It is very useful, and like I said, it's one of those things. Like the only real useful thing I can think of is if you don't want to have separate virtual machines, because it can really bog down a system, right? Uh, and plus, if you don't really if you want things to communicate with each other, that's where Docker would come in. You're quarantining it, but only communicating with things that it needs to. That's where it becomes really useful. So yeah. Well, I guess if nobody has any questions or anything, I'll see you guys next week, or maybe this Saturday if you are doing the meeting. I'll see you guys.
I'll see you Saturday. Thank you.
See ya.